You're still watching Business Nigeria now, barely 15 days after the transmission company of Nigeria celebrated 400 days of great stability. The country was again thrown into darkness following a total system collapse yesterday. The collapse occurred at about 12:40 a.m. on Thursday, 14 September 2023, leading to loss of supply in major parts of the country. Federal government has explained that the nationwide blackout witnessed was due to a fire incident and explosion of the Kainji Jebba 330 kV line to power consumers, however, have kicked against the unending excuse of government as regards power generation and supply in the country. Well, let's make more sense of this. And an energy lawyer, analyst, Dr. Ayodele Oni, joins me via Zoom to understand this development. Dr. Oni, good afternoon. And thank you so much for your time. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Oni, just a few days after celebrating 400 days of stable power supply, or stable power transmission, yeah, I think that's it. And now we are having this. Would we say that was a fluke? Or what happened? How did we get to this point?
Okay, so I wouldn't say it's a fluke. They've continuously worked on improving the transmission network. You know, the transmission network is a web of generation plants, transmission lines, and it connects generation companies to distribution companies, and you have the system operator and the market operator, that's the TCN, with the transmission service provider sort of in the middle. You would also have transformers. So anything that affects a web can lead to the loss of whatever is passing through that web. In this case, it's electricity. So once you have fire affecting a part of the web, or you have an imbalance, you have low frequency, a number of things can lead to it, or poor infrastructure which gets damaged. So I think consistently government has been working more recently on the grid. So I don't think it was a fluke, you know. But if you've had neglect for several years, when you begin to work on that thing that requires consistent maintenance, you will still struggle a bit. I think that's what it is.
Exactly where my second question will come from. We seem to have an infrastructure challenge with regards to Nigeria's power sector. For example, there is this belief that if we have supply for, say, 24 hours, 7 days a week, you start to see some poles begin to spark, you know, some scare everywhere. And so what really is the issue with infrastructure? Which angle do the investors come in? Yes, I know they are in the distribution side and the generation side. Transmission is still being run by government, right, Dr. Oni? So looking at all of this, how much of investment have we really had, even from the discos at this time, which remains very important?
To be honest, we've had several billions of investment, both from the discos and even the CBN. The CBN has lent monies to many of these companies. You've got the names and you've got various versions of the names. So I think that it's not just money, it's understanding how things should work. You know, about infrastructure, we need to do more. The fact that we've not had regular light for a while means that people have not seen the need to upgrade the infrastructure. When you then begin to have constant pressure on that infrastructure, they begin to cave in. Now, the challenge we've had is in Nigeria, we've had a problem with our market structure. In the books, if you look at the grid code and all of those documents, we have excellent documentation. But the devil is in implementation. In every power system or in every power market, you would have capacity, you'd have energy, you'd have imbalance, you'd have ancillary services also. So what has been the problem in Nigeria, why we also have this grid collapse, is because when, for example, that fire outage that happened, you have 300 or plus leaving the grid. It then meant that you had low frequency, what you would have in many countries. And the grid code and the documentation for the power sector make provision for that. But in implementation, we do not actually do what we ought to do. There should be what is known as spinning reserves, so that when we have 300 megawatts leave the grid, you have a plant that immediately comes up and brings power. Those plants don't run all the time, but they run in those situations where there's a loss of frequency so that they can balance out that frequency. You know, we're supposed to have them, and they call them spinning reserves. So it's a combination of our implementation and infrastructure that's been left unserviced, unupgraded for a long time. Because, for example, I'll give you a good example of the grid. Between 1987 and around the mid-2000s, nothing was done to improve the national grid. Imagine what the population of Nigeria was in 1987 and what it was, for example, in 2014. Huge gap. And we're using what we're using in 1987. So between 1987 to 2014, no improvement on the grid. So that's part of the problems. We have a maintenance culture problem in Nigeria, poor maintenance culture. So it's not sufficient about having the infrastructure, but you need to do both preventive and corrective maintenance, which we don't do. And the fact that we've not had power supply run almost 24/7, it means that the time you begin to have it, a lot of the equipment and infrastructure you have in place cannot carry that capacity. So that's what the problem is. So
Interesting.
we begin to have power. Yeah, please go on.
Go ahead. Interesting stuff. I'm a man who believes so much in Naira and Kobo, the figures, the dollars. Let's see what it means. Now, when issues like this or incidents like this happen, what does it mean for the entire value chain? The gas guys, the transmission guys, the distribution guys can't even sell. We can't vent because we don't even have supply. Something would definitely have to do with affect some bottom line there.
You're right, but the extent of its impact will depend on whether it's a total or partial collapse. When it's total, then it goes all out. But if you have systems in place such as the SCADA, the supervisory control and data acquisition equipment in place, and you have your ENS in place, you will be able to quickly detect those issues and be able to quickly make repairs so that it doesn't then last for a long time. And then if you have ancillary services such as black start capacity, you would have plans that can immediately start other plants within the system. So in 5-10 minutes, 1 hour, you're back. And the losses should be very minimal. Although there are certain factories, manufacturers that once they go out of power, it will take days, like the minting and printing company. They don't like to go out of power. So I'm sure they have UPS in place. And that's where we find ourselves until we do the right thing in terms of ensuring we have our auxiliary services in place. Issues around imbalance are dealt with. You have a black start capacity taken care of by the TCN. You have spinning reserves in place so that you do not every now and then work outside, because the grid is supposed to work within certain limits for it to be stable. Once it works outside those limits, then it becomes unstable and you would have a grid collapse. For example, if you have been taken by the distribution companies compared to what's been brought in, for example, part of why we have what we have, you have 300 megawatts off the grid because of the fire incidents in Kainji and Jebba. You didn't have spinning reserves or a standby generation plant to immediately kick in. We need to do that. We need to go through a procurement process to have that in place. You know, that's one of the things government does need to do almost immediately, and ensure that I understand that our SCADA should be in place in another 10, 11 months. If the SCADA is in place and the ENS works well, this should be a thing of the past.
The minister sure has a lot of work to do. Now, you talked about that greed, and many would say that that greed obviously cannot sustain us. For a country of 200 million people, generating 4,100 megawatts. South Africa is about 60 million, whichever figure you want to follow, and you're doing about 40,000 megawatts of electricity. Now, what are the alternatives that we have at this time, Dr. Oni, for Nigeria? It's easy for everyone to say, we have sun, we can get solar, we have wind, we can... What are really... Do we have coal and all of that? But what are really the alternatives? They are not that cheap, are they?
Okay, so good question. You know, with the Electricity Act, the 2023 Electricity Act, states can now set up or establish their own electricity market, which is a good thing. And at the moment, I'm advising 1 or 2 states around that. I think it's a good thing that states can now establish their own market. Although, like you stated, grid power is still the cheapest, because power works on an economics of scale. The more people taking power from the same source, the cheaper it is. So if everyone's doing grid power, it's cheaper. But to the extent that our grid cannot take care of all of us, the alternative of states having their own power and maybe regional arrangements will seem to be a good alternative. You know, I'm one for federal energy federalism, where states that have coal can use their coal. Yes, I know there are issues around energy transition, issues around net zero and decarbonization, but the countries that are most developed in the world now, they still use coal. Africa only gives less than 4% of the emissions everyone is complaining about. So I think states that have sunlight can use that and have an integrated system that can be maybe regional. Yes, I know the Electricity Act only supports states. Once it becomes regional, it goes back to the electricity regulator, NERC, the National Electricity Regulator. But I think from an availability or access point of view, we should make progress with states and regionalism. But from a pricing point of view, electricity isn't cheap anywhere in the world, to be honest. We just have to work around conservation. We'd have to work around ensuring that we can conserve and we can save and don't waste electricity. So that you begin to retrofit if you need to, use LED lights, use energy saving air conditioners. All of those are the alternatives. If you are leaving your house, leaving your room, switch off electricity. I don't think electricity is cheap anywhere in the world. In some cases, they have cross subsidy, such that the more wealthy people can cross subsidize the less people who are less able to bear the cost. But electricity isn't cheap. So I think what we should talk about is more access than cost. Because no matter how expensive grid power is, or regional or state power is, it's still way cheaper than individuals generating their power. And I think it's somewhere around 400 naira per kilowatt hour to generate your own electricity using diesel or using PMS. You know, so it'll be more expensive, but if we can get it right in terms of what the Electricity Act says, then we will make progress so that the grid then deals the poorer people, the states who can develop their own electricity market can then continue to rely on the national grid, while everybody else looks to regionalism or state electricity. That's the way I see progress. Whilst we, of course, then continue to upgrade and improve the national grid. But the immediate solution is to ensure that states can create their own electricity market. That's my own view. And it will be more expensive, but there will be access to electricity at least.
Dr. Ayodele, let me take you some years back to 2013 precisely, when the privatization was carried out or instituted. At least I've been covering the energy sector even before that time, and I followed this process. You've written books around the electricity market. You've been in this system also for a while, a long while. Do you think that privatization or privatizing Nigeria's power sector has really achieved positives more than negatives? I want to put you on the spot here.
Well, that's a difficult question. To be honest, I think we did the right thing at that time. The question then is, maybe it shouldn't have been done the way it was done. Maybe the process should have been different. But we did what we ought to do. And I think things would maybe have been worse if we hadn't privatized. Because then you had people who went professionals, you had politicians running the PATN, you had, like I always say, my dad told me a story once, my late dad told me a story once about someone who had studied Yoruba being the head of department in an engineering unit at the NEPA, National Electric Power Authority, the old integrated behemoth for the power sector. So now you wouldn't see such. You have experts. It's because for a long time you had government, there was no investment even in sciences, engineering, technical stuff, and you had only the old NEPA staff. So, you know, a problem that lasted for over 60 years cannot be resolved in 10, 15 years, you know, such a problem, such a national problem. So I think privatization that was done at that time was the right thing, but it hasn't achieved all we thought it would have achieved. There have been modest achievement, but I think it was still the right decision. So yes, we haven't achieved what we thought we will achieve from privatization, but we've made modest gains. But the gains are not as much as the challenges we still see.
I like that. Let's now talk almost finally about international collaborations. Before now, there was a deal with Siemens. I don't know if that is still in place. Some other international agencies coming in wanting to support rural electrification, solar, all of these areas around the country that need supply, even if it's just to charge their phones, put on bulbs, their fans and all of that. What do you think about all of these initiatives and how well has it helped to bridge the gap in regards to electricity supply across Nigeria?
Okay, to be honest, the international donor agencies, international collaboration and cooperation are very important. But the truth is that no one will solve your problems for you. You ought to solve your own problems. They can only provide the support. So that's where we need to be very careful. We are still responsible for solving our own problems. There's a rural electrification agency doing a lot in rural areas, particularly areas where you don't have the grid, doing solar home systems, distributed generation. So I think that infrastructure requires a lot of capital, a lot of funding, and I think that's where the international donors can come in. Because you'd hear all sorts. At some point, they said we needed several billions every year for the next 15 years to be able to have any semblance of reasonable power accessibility. So the question is, with our problems around reducing income for the country, then it's more difficult to be able to use our own funds. So I think that's where the donor agencies come in, and I think they're doing reasonably well. The US, UK's NIAF, and a number of these companies, countries and international donors are doing well. And I know the Rural Electrification Agency is doing quite a lot off-grid. So we are seeing progress. I've heard a few people say, oh, there are times I have electricity for 3-4 days without it blinking. You know, we just need to continue at the same pace and ensure that the right people, this current minister has the right people working with him, supporting him, and he does listen to them, and everyone works together. If we work across purposes, we will make progress. So I think the international agencies won't solve our problems, but will play a role in solving same. We are responsible for our own problems. We are responsible for solving our own problems.
Well, interesting stuff. I wanted you to drop a word for the minister, because, you know, we said earlier, a lot is on the table for him to handle at the moment. What should be the initial steps? Maybe we start that way, because I think it's a journey and it's starting from somewhere.
Okay, well, he should work with the right people. He should listen to them. He should accept collaborations. He should ensure that those things that were started by previous administrations continue. They don't just continue to change policies. And we should, very importantly, the Electricity Act talks about a national integrated electricity policy and strategic implementation plan. I think that's very critical. He needs to set up a team and ensure that we do something around that policy and its implementation, so that we don't have, now that states can create their own market, so that we don't have disjointed system, so that we don't continue, because the grid collapse can even get worse if there's no integration in terms of frequency, voltage, and all of that, and different states begin to do different things. So I think he needs to sit down, have the right people advise him, listen to them, embrace collaborations, work around the National Integrated Electricity Policy and Strategic Implementation Plan, ensure that that's in place and everyone works together to move things forward. I'm happy with the way they've dealt with the last grid collapse, the way he's been able to rally his troops to quickly resolve things. I think he should do that way, and he continues to do more. And communication is also very important. I've not been completely impressed around his communication. And I think that's where I leave it for now.
Dr. Ayodele Oni, thank you so much. Energy lawyer and analyst. Do have a great weekend.